There is a ghost haunting the history of Western literature. And no, I'm not talking about ghost of Hamlet's father, stalking the battlements.
Right.
I mean, the man who actually wrote him. We are talking about this paradox that honestly drives me crazy. Here you have the most famous writer in the English language.
Oh, easily. The most famous.
His works have been translated into over 80 languages that perform more than any other playwright in history, and they've sold, billions of copies.
It's just unavoidable. I mean, you can't get through a day without tripping over a phrase he invented.
Exactly. If you've ever said you were in a pickle or waiting with bated breath or you're going on a wild goose chase, you're quoting Shakespeare.
Tongue-tied, hoodwinked.
It's all him. He's the Titan, the Bard of Avon, and yet, and this is the crazy part, we know shockingly little about the actual man.
That is the absolute frustration of it.
Yeah.
We have no personal letters. Zero. Not a single one. We have no diaries. We don't have any original manuscripts written in his own hand, except for, a few disputed signatures and maybe one scene in a collaborative play. We don't even know his exact birthday.
And that's the thing that gets me. We have this titanic body of work that explores the deepest parts of the human soul. Jealousy, power, madness, love. And the guy behind it all, we have to reconstruct him almost entirely from what scholars call dusty details.
Right. It's all parish registers, legal deeds, court records for petty debts.
It's like trying to write a biography of a genius by looking at his tax returns and, his parking tickets.
And that vacuum is exactly why the myth has taken over. Because it's so big, people just fill it with fantasy. They want him to be a secret aristocrat or a spy or Francis Bacon.
Well, today we are stripping away that myth. We're not doing the Sage of the Ages in the rough collar. We're going to look at the cold, hard facts and the fascinating gaps between them. We want to reconstruct the life of William Shakespeare, the human being.
And the guy who emerges is so much more interesting.
Oh, he is not a stiff literary figure. He's a survivor. He's a hustler. He's a guy who got an older woman pregnant and had a shotgun wedding. He's a guy who might have been a criminal during a lost decade.
A ruthless businessman who hoarded grain during a famine.
And a husband who famously left his wife his second best bed. We are absolutely going to get to the bottom of that bed, I promise. But our mission today is to uncover the real man. So let's unpack this life. We have to start at the beginning. Stratford-upon-Avon, 1564.
Right. And immediately you have to adjust your mental picture. Stratford wasn't some, quaint little postcard village.
No.
It was a busy market town, but in 1564, it was a terrifying place to be born. We celebrate his birthday on April 23rd, St. George's Day, which is really poetic because he died on that day too. But all we actually know is that he was baptized on April 26th.
And back then, you didn't wait around to baptize a kid, did you?
No way. With the high infant mortality rates and, religious superstition, you get that baby to the font within 3 days. So April 23rd is a really good guess, but the context here is death. The year Shakespeare was born, the plague hit Stratford, and it hit hard.
How hard are we talking?
It killed about 200 people in a town of maybe 1,000.
Wow.
That's 1 in every 5 residents. Just imagine your street, every 5th house, suddenly empty. The Shakespeare family wasn't immune. William wasn't their first child. He was the third. But his 2 older sisters had both died in infancy before he was born.
So when William is born, he's not just another mouth to feed. He is the high-stakes roll of the dice. He's the eldest surviving son.
Exactly. There's a brilliant quote from the writer Bill Bryson that frames this perfectly. He said that Shakespeare's greatest achievement wasn't writing Hamlet or the sonnets. It was just surviving his first year.
That puts a lot of pressure on a kid, just being the one who lived. And his family, they weren't poor, right? I think a lot of people have this image of him as some peasant genius.
No, not at all. His dad, John Shakespeare, was a fascinating character in his own right. He was a glover by trade. He made these luxury gloves out of white leather, deerskin, sheepskin.
Fancy stuff.
Yeah, but he was socially ambitious. I mean, he climbed the municipal ladder in Stratford aggressively. He was an ale taster, then a constable, and eventually the high bailiff.
Which is basically the mayor.
Essentially, yes. And William's mother, Mary Arden, she came from a wealthy landowning family, the Ardens of Park Hall. So William is born into a family that is definitely on the way up. In that small-town context, he's a child of privilege.
But gravity set in pretty quickly, didn't it?
It did. By the late 1570s, so William's a teenager now, John Shakespeare's fortunes just crash. He stops attending council meetings. He gets prosecuted for usury. That's lending money at illegal interest rates. And he gets tangled up in illegal wool smuggling.
Wool smuggling? That sounds like the world's most I don't know, boring crime syndicate.
It sounds funny to us now, but in the Elizabethan economy, wool was like oil is today. It was the absolute backbone of the English economy. The government strictly regulated it to make sure they got their tax cut. John was dealing on the black market.
So he's a racketeer, a white-collar criminal.
And apparently not a very good one. He got caught. He was fined, lost his position. He ended up having to mortgage his wife Mary's properties. He was in deep financial trouble. And this is so crucial for understanding William. He grows up watching his father, this man of status, lose everything.
He sees the family name just drag through the mud.
Exactly. And that has to leave a mark. It's not just about the money. It's about the shame.
Right.
And a lot of historians argue that this whole experience instilled a lifelong obsession in William to restore the family fortune and, its status. He never wanted to be poor. He never wanted to be the guy dodging the sheriff. It explains so much about why, as we'll see later, he was such a shark with money.
But before he can start making any money, he has to get an education. And this is where the anti-Shakespeare people, the anti-Stratfordians, they always jump in here.
Oh yeah, this is their favorite argument.
They say, how could a Glover's son from some muddy sheep town know so much about Roman history and rhetoric and French and court politics?
Which is an argument that just fundamentally misunderstands Elizabethan education. We're pretty certain Shakespeare attended the King's New School in Stratford. As the son of the bailiff, he would have gone for free. And grammar school back then wasn't, finger painting. It was grueling.
So paint the picture for us. What's a Tuesday like for young Will Shakespeare?
Okay, so he's there from 6:00 6 days a week, and the curriculum is Latin. And then, for a change of pace, more Latin. They didn't just read it. They had to speak it. They memorized the standard texts, Ovid, Virgil, Cicero, Plautus, but more importantly, they learned rhetoric.
And rhetoric isn't just fancy talk, it's the art of argument.
Precisely. They used a system called the progymnasmata. It was a series of exercises where students had to construct arguments, write speeches in the voice of historical figures, and debate both sides of a topic. They'd be given a prompt like, is it better to be a king or a peasant?
Yeah.
And have to argue it using these classical structures.
So when he writes Julius Caesar or Coriolanus later in life,
he's drawing directly on the texts and the techniques that were literally beaten into him as a schoolboy. He didn't need to go to Oxford or Cambridge to learn about Roman betrayal. He learned it in Stratford. The small Latin and less Greek that his friend Ben Jonson later credited him with was actually, by our standards today, a really rigorous classical education.
So he's got the tools, he's got the brain, he's got this disgraced father looming over him, and then at 18 years old, life comes at him fast. It's 1582. And we find a marriage license bond.
Indeed we do. William Shakespeare, aged 18, marries Anne Hathaway.
And Anne was not 18.
No, Anne was 26, 8 years his senior. That age gap was unusual, though not completely unheard of. But the real smoking gun here is the timeline. The marriage license was rushed. They actually paid extra to skip the banns. That's the public announcements read in church for 3 weeks. They needed to get married, like now.
Because there was a baby on the way.
Exactly. 6 months later, their first daughter, Susanna, was baptized. Anne was 3 months pregnant when they walked down the aisle.
A shotgun wedding in Elizabethan England. That must have been quite the local scandal.
Oh, absolutely. Premarital sex was a sin. And while it definitely happened, it was a huge source of shame. For a young man whose father was already in disgrace, this was not the ideal start to adult life. And it didn't stop there. By the time he's 21, William Shakespeare is the father of 3 children.
Right, the twins.
Susanna, and then the twins, Hamlet and Judith, who were born in 1585.
Let's just pause there for a second. Put yourself in his shoes. You're 21 years old. Your dad is basically broke. You have a wife who is significantly older than you. You have 3 screaming kids. And you're living in a small town where everyone knows your business. That feels like a trap.
It really does. It feels like the prologue to a very ordinary, very difficult life, a life where you just end up working in the family glove shop forever to feed all those mouths.
But he doesn't stay. And that brings us to the most mysterious part of his entire life, the lost years.
This is the black hole in the biography. From 1585, right after the twins are baptized, to 1592, when he suddenly shows up in London as an established playwright, William Shakespeare just vanishes from the historical record.
7 years.
7 years. We have no idea where he was or what he was doing.
And nature abhors a vacuum, so of course historians have come up with all sorts of theories. Let's run through the big ones. Theory number 1, the poacher.
The most famous legend. The story goes that Shakespeare was caught poaching deer on the estate of a local bigwig, Sir Thomas Lucy, at Charlcote Park. To avoid prosecution and a severe punishment like a public whipping or imprisonment, he fled to London.
It's a great story. Makes him sound like a rogue, a bit of a bad boy. Is there any truth to it?
Probably not.
Ah.
It doesn't appear in writing until the 18th century, more than 100 years after he died. It's most likely folklore that was invented to explain why he left town in such a hurry. Plus, it turns out Sir Thomas Lucy didn't actually have a licensed deer park at that time. So, small detail.
Okay, so scratch the dashing poacher. What's theory number 2? The schoolmaster.
Now, this one has a bit more traction. A 17th century gossip named John Aubrey wrote that Shakespeare had been a schoolmaster in the country. And this ties into a very compelling theory called the Lancashire Connection.
I love this one. This one feels like a spy novel.
It really does. So there's a will from a wealthy Catholic landowner up in Lancashire named Alexander Houghton, and it's dated 1581. In the will, he leaves money and some musical instruments to a certain William Shakeshaft and asks his neighbor to look after him.
Shakeshaft. Is that close enough to Shakespeare?
In an era of non-standardized spelling, absolutely. And Shakeshaft was a known variation of the name in his home county. The theory is that John Shakespeare, William's father, was secretly a Catholic.
Which was very illegal in Protestant England.
Highly illegal. It was called recusancy. We actually have evidence for this. A Catholic spiritual testament was found hidden in the rafters of John Shakespeare's house years later. So the idea is that young William was sent north to this protected Catholic household in Lancashire to work as a tutor for the kids or maybe as a player for their private entertainments, away from the prying eyes of the Stratford authorities.
That connects a lot of dots, doesn't it? It explains how he got into acting, working as a player for a wealthy household. And it explains the silence. If you're part of an underground religious network, the last thing you want to do is leave a paper trail.
It's probably the most plausible explanation for how a boy from Stratford got the training and, crucially, the connections to break into the London theater world.
And then there's the third theory, which is kind of a catch-all. He did everything. He was a soldier, a lawyer, a sailor.
Right. This is when people look at the plays and work backward. He uses all this legal jargon in The Merchant of Venice, so he must have been a law clerk. He knows about Italian geography and Romeo and Juliet, so he must have traveled across Europe. He knows about war, so he must have been a soldier.
You don't buy it?
No. I think Shakespeare was a sponge. He was a genius listener and a voracious reader. He read Holinshed's Chronicles for history. He read Plutarch for Roman laves. He read Ovid for myths. He could get all that information from books and from talking to people in London's taverns. He didn't need to sail to Venice to write about a merchant. He just needed to listen to a sailor complain about his boss over a pint of ale.
So, however it happened, whether he was Shakeshaft or not, the likely reality is that he joins a traveling acting troupe, maybe one like the Queen's Men, that passed through the provinces, and he just rode that wagon all the way to London.
Leaving the wife and 3 kids behind in Stratford.
Which is a pretty bold move. So he arrives in London in the late 1580s or early 90s, and London at this time is just exploding. It's noisy, it's smelly, it's dangerous, and he makes a splash. Because the very first time we hear his name in London in 1592, he's being insulted.
Ah, yes. Robert Greene. He was what they called a university wit, a playwright with fancy degrees from Cambridge. And he writes this pamphlet on his deathbed called Greene's Groatsworth of Wit. In it, he warns his fellow educated playwrights about a new guy on the scene. He calls him an upstart crow, beautified with our feathers.
Upstart crow, that is such a good burn. I love that.
It's brilliant. He also calls him a Johannes Factotum, a Johnny Do-It-All. And then he misquotes a line from Shakespeare's own play, Henry VI, calling him a Shakespeare.
So basically this fancy university guy is furious, and he's saying, who is this uneducated peasant actor who has the nerve to think he can write plays as well as us?
Exactly. It's pure, unadulterated snobbery. But for us, historically, it is gold, because it proves that by 1592, Shakespeare wasn't just in London. He was established enough, successful enough, to really annoy the competition. He had arrived.
But just as he arrives, disaster strikes again. The plague returns.
Yes. From 1592 to 1594, the theaters in London were closed for nearly 2 years because of the bubonic plague. If you're a playwright who makes your living from ticket sales, this is a catastrophe. It's a potential career ender.
So what does he do? He pivots. He stops writing plays for the masses and starts writing poetry for the elite.
He writes Venus and Adonis in 1593 and The Rape of Lucrece in 1594. These are long narrative poems. They're sophisticated, they're erotic, they're based on classical myths, and they're dedicated to a patron. Henry Wriothesley, the young Earl of Southampton.
Southampton. Young, incredibly rich, and by all accounts, very beautiful.
Yeah.
And the language Shakespeare uses to address him in these dedications, let's just say it's not standard corporate speak.
No, it is not. The dedication in Venus and Adonis is polite, but the one in Lucrece is, well, it's intense. He writes, "The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end. What I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours. Being part in all I have, devoted yours."
And this is where the speculation engine just revs up again. Was it romantic? Was Shakespeare gay or bisexual?
It is the eternal question, isn't it? We have the sonnets, many of which are addressed to a fair youth who fit Southampton's description perfectly.
Oh.
And the language in those sonnets is undeniably romantic and at times erotic. I mean, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" was written for a man.
But we have to be careful with context, right?
Right.
This is a different time.
We absolutely do. The language of patronage involved a kind of extreme flattery. You spoke to your patron in the language of love and servitude because you wanted them to give you money. It didn't always mean a physical relationship. However, looking at the raw emotional vulnerability in the sonnets, the jealousy, the obsession, it's really hard for a modern reader to look at that and see it as just a business transaction. There was clearly a profound emotional connection there, whatever its nature.
So, regardless of what was happening behind closed doors, the strategy worked. Southampton likely gave him a big cash gift to survive the plague years. And when the theaters finally reopened in 1594, Shakespeare makes the single most important business move of his life. He stops being a freelancer.
He becomes a founding member of the Lord Chamberlain's Men. This is crucial. He wasn't just a writer for hire anymore. He became a sharer, a shareholder. He owned a piece of the company. He acted in the plays. He wrote the plays. And he got a cut of the profits.
This is the moment he secures his financial future. He's got the dream team. Richard Burbage, the greatest actor of the age, is playing his leads. Will Kemp, the funniest clown in England, is doing the comedy. And Shakespeare is providing the scripts.
It was an absolute powerhouse. For the next decade, they just dominated the London stage.
Yeah.
But they had a problem. They didn't own their own theater. They were renting a place called the Theater in Shoreditch. And their landlord, a guy named Giles Allen, was a total nightmare.
This leads to one of my favorite stories in all of literary history, The Heist.
The Heist of 1599. It's amazing. So the lease had run out. The landlord, Giles Allen, claimed the building now belonged to him because it was on his land. The company disagreed. They found a clause in the original lease that said they could dismantle the building. So on December 28th, 1599, in the dead of winter, snow on the ground, while the landlord was away in the country for Christmas, Shakespeare and the company showed up.
They brought a carpenter on a whole crew.
And probably some muscle. They took the theater apart, beam by beam, timber by timber. They loaded all the wood onto wagons. They ferried it across the frozen River Thames to the South Bank, to an area called Southwark. And they used that stolen wood to build their very own theater.
The Globe.
The legendary Globe. The Woodno, an open-air amphitheater that could hold 3,000 people. And Shakespeare wasn't just a writer there. He was now a part owner of the building itself. He owned 12.5% of the Globe.
This is where he makes his real money.
This is it. Every time a groundling paid a penny to stand in the yard, or a gentleman paid 6 pence for a seat in the gallery, Shakespeare got a fraction of it. It was a money-printing machine.
So let's look at Shakespeare the playwright during this peak moment. He's just churning out plays. How many?
Roughly 2 a year, which is an incredible pace when you remember he was also acting in them and helping to manage the whole business.
And he's jumping between genres, comedies, histories, tragedies. But here's the secret a lot of people don't realize. He wasn't just inventing these stories from scratch.
Almost never. Shakespeare was the ultimate remix artist. Romeo and Juliet was based on a popular poem by Arthur Brooke. Hamlet was based on an older Danish legend and probably a lost play. Julius Caesar is lifted straight from Plutarch's Lives.
So he's not worried about spoilers. The audience already knows the ending.
No, not at all. The audience knew the stories. His genius was in the how. He took a dry, boring history chronicle and turned it into a profound character study. He took a stock revenge plot and turned it into a meditation on suicide and the meaning of existence. He gave the characters these rich, complicated interior lives.
And he gave them the words. The sheer number of words he invented is just mind-blowing.
It's over 1,700 words that first appear in print in his work. Words I take completely for granted. Assassination, lonely, bump, manager, uncomfortable, swagger.
Wow.
He was literally bending the English language to his will. If a word didn't exist to describe what a character was feeling, he just made one up.
So he's creatively on fire, he's making a fortune at the Globe, and what does he do with that money? He doesn't spend it on wild parties in London, he sends it back home to Stratford.
He's a very, very shrewd and very conservative businessman. In 1597, he buys New Place, which was the second largest house in Stratford. It was a mansion. Then he buys 107 acres of prime farmland, and he starts buying tithes.
Explain tithes for us, because that sounds religious, but it wasn't right.
It sounds religious, but it was purely financial. It was essentially tax farming. He bought the right to collect taxes, a tenth of the produce from local grain and hay harvests. It was like an Elizabethan investment derivative. He paid a big lump sum up front, and then he collected the income annually. It was a steady, safe return on his investment.
This is a side of him that people find so hard to reconcile with the sensitive artist. I mean, he was kind of ruthless.
He really was. We have court records of him suing his own neighbors for small debts loans of, £2. He pursued them aggressively in court for these tiny amounts. And then there's the grain incident.
Okay, tell us about the grain. This is the part that really hurts the St. William image.
In the late 1590s and early 1600s, there were terrible harvests. It was a period they call the Little Ice Age. It was cold, it was wet, and the crops failed. There was a famine. People were literally starving in the streets of Stratford. And Shakespeare, now a wealthy landowner, hoarded malting, a key ingredient for beer and bread. He held on to it to sell when prices inevitably spiked.
So he was price gouging his starving neighbors?
He was. He was even investigated by the authorities for hoarding.
That is... that's not very heroic.
No, but it is very human. You have to remember the little boy who watched his father go bankrupt. You have to remember the public shame. Shakespeare was driven by this deep-seated fear of poverty. He was securing his legacy. He even paid off the heralds at the College of Arms to finally grant his father that coat of arms John had wanted all those years ago.
And the motto was non sans droit.
Not without right. It almost sounds defensive, doesn't it? Like, I earned this, I belong here. He effectively gentrified his own family. He made them official gentlemen.
But just as he's securing this financial and social legacy, tragedy strikes the one thing money can't buy. His heir.
Hamnet.
1596. Shakespeare's in London at the height of his powers. And back in Stratford, his only son, Hamnet, dies. He was 11 years old.
It was likely the plague again, or maybe typhus. We don't know for sure. But with Hamnet, the male line of the Shakespeare family ends. In the Elizabethan mind, the family name, that coat of arms he just fought so hard for, it all depended on a male heir. It was a devastating dynastic blow.
People always look for Hamnet in the plays. I mean, he writes Hamlet just a few years later. The names are basically interchangeable in documents from that time.
It's always dangerous to psychologize too much, but it's very hard to miss the shift in his tone. His plays become so much darker, more complex. The comedy genre starts to break down into what we now call problem plays. And the theme of lost children, or fathers grieving for their children, appears again and again.
There's that specific quote in King John, right? Which was written around this time.
Yes. A character, Constance, is lamenting her lost son. And she says, "Grief fills the room up of my absent child, lies in his bed, walks up and down with me, puts on his pretty looks, repeats his words."
But that's just visceral. Grief fills the room up. That doesn't feel like a writing exercise. That feels like a man who knows exactly what an empty room feels like.
It feels incredibly personal. So he channels that grief into his work. He writes his greatest tragedies, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, in this period. But then the physical world around him starts to crumble too. 1613.
The end of the globe.
They were performing Henry VIII, which was a massive spectacle play. And for a special effect, they set off a cannon. A spark from the cannon wadding hit the thatched roof. The wooden O burned to the ground in less than an hour.
Miraculously, no one died, right? I heard a story about that.
No one died. One man's breeches caught on fire, but the record says they put it out with a bottle of ale.
A very English solution.
A very English solution. But for Shakespeare, who was 49 years old, this seems to have been the final signal.
Time to go home.
It was. He seems to have taken it as a sign to retire. He sells his shares in the company. He leaves London for good. He goes back to Stratford to live in that big house, New Place, with his wife and his daughters.
But the drama just follows him. His family life in Stratford wasn't exactly a quiet, peaceful retirement.
Not at all. His daughters were involved in their own scandals. Susanna, the eldest, was sued for slander. Someone accused her of having a venereal disease and being an adulteress. She fought it in court, and one proved it was false. But the younger daughter, Judith Hamnet's twin, she had it much rougher.
Judith seems to have had a very difficult time.
In 1616, just a few months before Shakespeare died, she married a man named Thomas Quiney. He was a local tavern owner. And Shakespeare clearly didn't trust him. He was right not to. Shortly after the wedding, it was revealed that Quiney had impregnated another woman who then died in childbirth along with the baby.
Oof. So Shakespeare's on his deathbed, and his new son-in-law is being publicly disgraced for fornication and causing the death of a woman and a child.
It was an absolute mess. And you can see Shakespeare's rage in his will. He calls his lawyer in and rewrites the will in early 1616. He completely stripped Thomas Quiney of any access to Judith's inheritance. He tied the money up in these strict legal knots to protect his daughter from her disaster of a husband.
Which brings us to the end. April 1616. He's only 52. What took him out?
We don't know for sure. The legend, which was recorded by a local vicar years later, is that he had a merry meeting with his writer friends Ben Jonson and Michael Drayton. Apparently they drank too hard, and Shakespeare contracted a fever from which he died.
I mean, dying after a party with your best friends are worse ways to go.
It fits the legend of the Bohemian poet, for sure. But in 1616, it was most likely something like typhus or influenza. The drink might have just weakened his immune system. He died on April 23rd, 1616.
And he's buried in the chancel of Holy Trinity Church. But not because he was a great writer.
No, because he was a tithe holder. He paid for that prime spot. He was buried as a local dignitary, a wealthy gentleman, not as a national treasure.
And he left a curse on his grave.
He did. The inscription reads, "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear, to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares the stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones."
Why the curse? What was he afraid of?
He was terrified of the charnel house. In those days, if the churchyard ran out of room, they would just dig up old bones and move them to a bone house to make space for new bodies. Shakespeare wanted to rest in peace. And you know what? The curse worked. Nobody's ever moved those bones.
Okay, we have to talk about the will, specifically the second best bed. This is the thing everyone knows. He leaves almost everything to his daughter, Susanna. But to his wife of over 30 years, Anne, he leaves one single line.
"Item I give unto my wife, my second best bed with the furniture."
It sounds awful to our modern ears. It just sounds like a final slap in the face. Here, honey, take the lumpy mattress. So, was it an insult?
There are really two schools of thought here. The cynical view says yes, absolutely, it was a snub. He gave everything of value to the daughter to keep the estate intact, and Anne was just this embarrassing afterthought. He didn't love her. He lived in London for 20 years while she raised the kids alone. It was a final insult.
Okay, what's the other view, the romantic view?
The contextual view is much warmer. In an Elizabethan household of their status, the best bed was the guest bed. It was this expensive showpiece that was kept in the parlor, reserved for important visitors. You didn't actually sleep in it. The second best bed was the marital bed. It was the bed they slept in together. It was the bed where their children were conceived and likely born. It was their intimate bed.
So by leaving her that specific bed, he's leaving her the most potent symbol of their marriage.
That's the argument. Also, legally, under what was called common law, Anne would have been entitled to 1/3 of his estate and residency in the house for life anyway, regardless of what the will said. So maybe he didn't need to mention her financially, and the bed was this specific, sentimental, personal gesture.
We'll never know for sure.
We'll never truly know. It's a Rorschach test for how you see their relationship.
It's another one of those blank spaces we have to fill in ourselves. But here is the ultimate irony of his death. He spent his entire life building this financial legacy, the land, the big house, the coat of arms. He wanted to be a gentleman, founder of a dynasty.
And it all failed. His direct line died out within a few decades. The house, new place, was eventually demolished. The money dissipated. The gentleman status meant nothing in the end.
But the thing he seemed to care the least about, his plays, that's what survived.
And only just barely. This is maybe the most important part of the whole story. Shakespeare didn't publish his own plays. To him, they weren't literature. He wrote them to be performed, not read. When he died, half of his plays had never been published.
Half. Which ones are we talking about?
18 plays. We're talking about Macbeth, Julius Caesar, The Tempest, Twelfth Night, As You Like It, Antony and Cleopatra.
So if nothing had happened after his death, those plays, they would have just been lost forever.
Gone. Vanished. We would never have heard All the World's a Stage or Et tu, Brute or Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. They only existed as handwritten prompt books in the theater and in the memories of the actors.
So who saved them?
His friends. 2 actors from his company, John Hemingway and Henry Condell. They had worked with him for 20 years, and they decided to do something completely unprecedented. They gathered up all the scripts they could find, the prompt books, the scribbled notes, the actors' parts, and in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare died, they published the first folio.
The single most important book in English literature.
Without a doubt, it was a huge financial risk to publish such a large, expensive book of plays, but they wrote in the preface that they did it only to keep the memory of so worthy a friend and fellow alive. They didn't do it for money, they did it for love.
That just gives me chills. The man who seemed so obsessed with money and status was ultimately saved, his legacy secured, by friendship.
And it connects right back to what Ben Jonson, his great rival and friend, wrote in the tribute poem for that folio. He was not of an age, but for all time.
And so we're left with the man, not a god, not a mystery author in the shadows, but a guy. A guy who survived the plague, married young, maybe abandoned his family to chase a dream, wrote like an angel, hoarded grain like a miser, grieved his son, and left us this incredible world of words.
A man of contradictions.
Yeah.
A human being. And maybe that's why his characters feel so real to us even today. Because the man who wrote them lived a life that was messy and complicated and driven by the very human desire to survive and leave a mark.
What a story.
It really is.
So I want to know what you think. That second best bed, was it a romantic gesture or a final, bitter insult? It's the ultimate test of whether you're a cynic or a romantic at heart.
I like to think it was romance, but then I remember the grain hoarding, and I wonder...
If you enjoyed uncovering the real man behind the plays, please do us a favor, subscribe to the History Titans channel. Like this video and share it with a friend who thinks history is boring. And let us know in the comments, do you think the second best bed was an insult or a gift of love? We'll see you on the next deep dive.